Bianca for president. I'd like the commissioner starting from my right to introduce themselves.
Hosea Roger, Democrat.
Marie Costello, Richmond Democrat.
John Flateau, Kings County Democrat. Alan Shulkin, Manhattan Democrat.
Frederick Humane, Manhattan Republican.
Simon Shamoon, Kings Republican.
Michael Andino, Bronx County Republican. Michael Michelle, Queens Republican.
The staff, senior staff.
Pamela Perkins, Administrative Manager. Georgia Cosamanis, Operations Manager.
Rafael Spino, Deputy General Counsel.
Nina M. Crispino, Director of Personnel.
Has all the commissioners had an opportunity to review, are we done? Valerie, you introduce yourself?
Valerie Vasquez, Director of Communications.
Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes from January 19th, 2016?
Can you table them? I haven't read them. Don't mind.
The table, we're just waiting for Mr. Ryan to arrive.
Yeah, Mr. Bell's here.
Debbie here? We can move on to number 3, if Debbie DeBelle and
Yes, she's
Ms.
here.
Vasquez are ready.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
In your packet, you should have a draft proposal for the 17-year-old poll worker program, as well as a draft application and a letter to the principal. Give you a minute to follow. Yeah. Executive management asked Debbie and myself to research the feasibility of beginning a pilot program of 17-year-old poll workers in accordance with election law. I think it's section 3400. So, sub A, that would allow for a person who is 17 years of age, who enrolled in a school district and fulfilling the requirements of section 3200 7A of election law, shall be eligible to be appointed as an election inspector or poll clerk. So the idea is that we would begin with a pilot program. It's our recommendation that we start off with a 5 schools, specialized schools, so it would be 1 per borough. Again, this is a draft, so we've identified Staten Island Academy, Bronx High School of Science, Brooklyn Tech, Queens High School for the Sciences at York, and Stuyvesant as the schools that we would reach out to and ask the principals to make a recommendation of 5 to 10 students who they think would be a good fit. Ultimately, they would have to have a GPA of at least 2.5. They would have to complete the application, so a designated high school poll worker program application. We would have sign off by the parent or guardian, as well as the dean or principal. And the students essentially would be agreeing to serve as a poll worker a full day. They get the same stipend, same training. When we reached out to Los Angeles, they said that one of the requirements is that they have a very strict cutoff. So in their instance, the polls closed at 9, but the students had to be released by 10 p.m. So even if there were other poll workers that were staying later, the students were required to leave by 10. So again, this is just a draft. We're really putting this out there to gauge the interest and see if this is something that we should continue to research.
How did you pick the schools? I'm wondering why not Tattle High School?
We could totally make changes to the schools, and if you wanted to continue, we could send you a list perhaps in each of your respective boroughs and come to a consensus of which school per borough. But
Staten Island Academy is a private, expensive school, and the public schools, I'd rather see you go to the public schools.
Staten Island Tech.
Oh, you said
Tech,
Staten Island
Tech,
Academy.
Tech,
Oh, okay.
Tech.
I was wondering.
I think it's a good program, but one of the things we should look at too is that I know there is a labor law and requirement. I don't know if it's 16 and under or on school days, they can only work so many hours. So that, I don't know if it goes to 17-year-olds. I know 16 and under, if it's a school night, they can only work 4 hours, and it's certain requirements that they have. So,
So we'll look into the.
yeah,
you
look
said
into
with
that
people-
before we do any of this, if a 17-year-old can go that high. And I would also just include, not only talking to the principals, but one of the things is, most high schools, which you know I am president of a high school, is that the guidance department actually does the job recruiting
Okay,
and all that. So they know the kids that really need a job and all. So the principal is the lead, but I think you should all contact the guidance department.
so the sign off should be from, because
Well,
we
no.
have it as the dean, principal, headmaster, or equivalent, so you
Yeah,
think
yeah, but
the
it's the
guidance
guidance
can,
department.
okay.
In high schools, a lot of them have job centers, or they have the guidance department, which is a component.
Okay.
And that's where all the kids go.
Okay.
So, of course, the principal has to sign off, but I think that's where you're gonna be, your connection.
Okay, so we'll make that change.
In Brooklyn, I think we might wanna consider another high school because Brooklyn Tech is specialized, which means those students are coming in from all over the city. And I think I would rather see a high school where it's more likely that the young people in that school are Brooklyn residents. It would be more, I think it would be more convenient
Okay.
for them if they were gonna be assigned out, if they actually, that's just a thought. Commissioner Shamoon, you may have a.
Yeah, I'd like to review this a little further, but on its face, I think that's a good suggestion.
Right, and just so that we're clear, no decision on this is required right this minute. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner.
No, go ahead. You're doing
So,
fine.
we just wanted to get the thought out there and
Sure.
start to have the discussion. I mean, clearly, if ultimately we come to a collective decision where we want to try to implement it for April, then the time is getting a little bit short, but we're not at the barrel of a gun where it has to happen by April. I mean, clearly, the sooner we get it moving, the better off we'll be, but we have time on it, so.
Commissioner Ewing?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. I spoke to legal this morning on this, and the way the statute is written, it says children in the school district. So I wasn't sure if that meant that they had to be public school kids and not private school kids, the way the statute was written. It doesn't make sense to me, but they could have said any kid enrolled in a school, because it could have been a 17-year-old in college, but it says in a school district.
But-
So I don't know what that means.
Okay,
And-
but, when it says, school in the district, even the private schools are part of that district. They do have a number. Even private schools are in district, like, we're in District 24. We're within the city.
Okay, so that would include private and parochial schools, because that was a question that I had, and there didn't seem to be much guidance in either the statute or anything else. Also, don't the kids have to be citizens? In your write-up, there was something about another
Permanent
sort
US
of category.
Permanent US
Permanent
resident.
US residents. Our interpreters have to be permanent US residents, they don't have to be citizens.
Okay, so, but an inspector does have to be a citizen.
Inspector does, but I would hope in this program that we might be able to get some kids, particularly in Queens, that could be Korean translators.
Or translators in any language potentially.
Right.
But again, I mean, like I said, this is, there are some details that needed to be worked out, and I think part of the reason to make the presentation today was exactly this kind of interplay, to get the questions that the commissioners may need answered, and come back at a later date with answers to those questions.
Yeah, and just to continue, I wasn't sure that we should have a 10 o'clock cutoff for them. I think if they're doing the job, they need to be doing the same job. An idea around that might be to utilize Section 7 of the same statute, which talks about the half-a-day type of commission, type of poll worker. So maybe for the 17-year-olds, if we run into either a child labor law issue or something else, maybe for them, we could divide the day in half and sort of make it into a double sort of program. So those are just some ideas. But I would clarify that if they're if they're a resident, that they would be eligible for only translators and not to be a regular poll worker.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say I have the same concerns as Dr. Flatel. A lot of the people who go to Stuyvesant High School are not Manhattan residents.
The commissioner should submit a proposal of the schools
What we-
you
right.
prefer in your borough.
We'll let her reach out and make the contacts first with the principal.
Right, well,
Well, fine.
one of the things that I was going to suggest, and I think it would kind of dovetail nicely into overlap responsibilities of the ballot layout committee. There used to be a procedures committee, which was collapsed into the other titles that we adopted for the commissioners, but I think that the ballot layout committee might be, a right place for this to land, just considering the overall responsibilities of this.
Outreach.
Well, whatever the commissioners might suggest, to have a committee meeting, whichever committee it gets assigned to, and then we can hash this all out and then come back to the commissioners with a more full-throated recommendation. And just along those lines, that would apply to item number 4 on the agenda as well, which was the suggestion we were going to make. So whichever one of the committees that the commissioners would like this assigned to, we can ask for it to be assigned to a committee and then schedule a meeting so that all of these concerns can be addressed, discussed, etc.
Should we assign it to a committee now?
Yeah, take it to outreach, those communications.
It should be personnel. I mean, that's just my suggestion, since it is an employee
Good.
co-worker.
We could do it like the legislature and have it assigned to 7 different committees.
Although outreach has been working directly with our communications director on other issues, but I would defer to the majority. Pride of
Okay, great, so we'll assign the personnel committee to work with you on this issue. Okay? Okay. Thank you. Stephen, do we have Stephen Thompson and Debbie LaBelle there?
You guys left, Ms. LaBelle and Mr. Thompson. Run away. We have to discuss the information clerk issue. Now, I've discussed this matter with staff, and in the past, there was a separate poll worker position known as the information clerk, and ultimately that was collapsed into the inspector title, and those duties were subsumed. In the recommendations from the election center recommended that we at least consider separating that back out again for purposes of clarification and at the poll site and to better assist the voters. That's a recommendation. And then further, now that Mr. Thompson has been assigned to manage the tablet project, there seems like there is a further need to clarify the responsibilities of the information clerk, as well as specialized training on the tablets. So perhaps not training 30,000 poll workers all at once to work on tablets, and narrowing that down to a particular group of individuals that would have specialized knowledge on the tablets and better assist the voters is the way to go. But again, I think that these two items, 3 and 4, can be dovetailed into a single day of presentation ultimately to the personnel committee, and then we can discuss the pros and cons under those circumstances.
Yeah, I understand the need and the complexities of the tablet, having had a tablet at the last election. But I'm a little concerned about training, not doing complete cross-training. Because the biggest problem that we have, I think, on election day is just not having enough people to work. And you need to have people cross-trained to be able to do the different tasks, because we never know who's actually going to be showing up. And so I'm a little concerned about sort of limiting the training to this core group of, I guess, information clerks, but they ought to know how to do the other tasks, because we may have a full complement of information clerks, and nobody showing up to be an inspector or a machine clerk or whomever, and then we're gonna be stuck. So I just think when the committee looks at this, they ought to consider that as a key issue.
Well, and I think, Commissioner Humane, the idea behind this was to train the information clerk as a regular poll worker and then give them the additional training on the operation of the tablet. And that was kind of a way to get more bang for your buck as opposed to less.
So that there's not gonna be training on the tablets for the regular inspectors?
Well, I think that is something that's a more long-term discussion, because it's about 30,000, folks that would have to get trained on that. So this was a way to kind of dip your foot in the pool and get some folks done to move along, and then clearly down the road, if the cross-training is something that needs to be done, fully across the board, we can continue to address that.
But I mean, it would
we have
seem to me
short-term and
that
long-term goals.
Well, that the people who are working the tablets are gonna be the ones at the end of the day, pulling out the memory sticks and putting them in the tablets and sending it off, so that you're inevitably gonna have people using tablets that aren't information clerks.
Okay, so I guess we gotta break it up into two separate discussions, right? The folks at the end of the day that would be downloading the results would be the coordinators. So they would be kind of handling the results. We're talking about the during the day process to try to get more use out of the tablets as the day is going along, particularly with respect to keeping the lines moving and having some poll workers that can serve as line walkers. So in those areas where lines might be building up, you'd still have your information table, and we'd still be doing the regular routine check-in, but in addition to that, we'd have folks walking the line to assist the voters to try to just keep that line moving. So I think that's kind of underscores where we landed a few minutes ago, which is this is really more of a committee conversation where all of those issues can be fully discussed back and forth, and then we can come back to the full board with a hopefully a more well-developed plan after we get sufficient commissioner input.
But I would look at it globally, not just, not just the guys on the line, so to speak.
Yep, absolutely. And
So we'll have the personnel committee?
yeah, I figured we could combine even though they're separated as two different items, I think we can combine them as one meeting. All right. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
I think you guys are dismissed. I didn't mean to jump the gun. Anybody else have any questions? No? Okay. All right. I'll go back to item 2 now. We'll start with item 2C, because I think that can be most easily dispensed with. This is a revisiting of the 1850s, and I'll say again for public consumption that the date of birth, January 1st, 1850, came as a result years ago of the transition into the NICE voter system that was established by the state. So in prior iterations of the law, you could vote at age 21 or you could vote at age 18, and under the prior circumstances, you did not have to provide your actual date of birth. You simply had to attest that you were at least 21 years of age or at least 18 years of age when the law changed. That led to the New York City Board of Elections not having dates of birth for a certain number of individuals. When the NICE voter system came into play, it was devised in such a way that you had to put a date of birth in. You could no longer say over 18 or over 21. So it was not a mistake. It wasn't just somebody doing something silly. it was as a result of discussions back and forth between the various jurisdictions in the state with the State Board of Election that they came up with a fictional date of 1/1/1850 to assign that date of birth as a date of birth for the people who fell into the over 21 or over 18 categories. So, the reason that that was done was, at the time, it was considered to be a date of birth that no one could possibly have in that moment, right? It was well beyond the oldest living person's date of birth. So, what ended up happening was, there was mailings done over the course of time, but memory being what it is, folks take a look at these things for the first time, and they then presume that that's the first time it's being looked at. So there was a particular periodical in New York City, who I will not give advertising to, that visited this particular issue as if it was massive discovery of some potential failing on the part of not only this Board of Elections, but all boards of elections throughout the state. So in any event, we have looked at it. The total numbers of individuals that were left with a 1/1/1850 date of birth. Now keep in mind, because these folks registered legally at the time that they registered, we cannot unregister them. They must remain registered, and if they fail to give us their actual date of birth, they will remain in the system as a 1/1/1850 until such time as we get a date of birth. In any event, at the direction of the commissioners, and to provide some level of clarification, we sent out 1,174 letters to people falling into this category. As of January 25th, 2016, we received back 392 responses. Of the 392 responses received, 264 sent in their date of birth. Of 34 were confirmed as deceased and will be, if they have not already been, removed from the rolls as confirmed deceased. And we had a total of 94 undeliverable letters, and those folks, we will commence the inactive process on the undeliverable. So that leaves us a total of 392. That also leaves us a total of 782 folks who we did not receive responses from. And so that's where we stand. We've done what we can do up to this point, and I guess the only thing that remains is a decision from the commissioners whether or not you want this to become part of our annual process to revisit, every year until we whittle it down, until it becomes, eventually it'll become a zero. I don't know if that'll happen in our lifetime, but eventually it will.
Well, what we could do is you use the post office. In 1850, they used the Pony Express. You might be able to use that.
What year did they change it over? What year was it and put it into 1850?
I believe it was 2006, if my memory serves me correctly. Whenever they established, and we can get the exact date, but whenever the state established a nice voter system, because prior to that, the local boards of election were on their own systems, and then eventually we had to conform with the state system. I think it was 2006, but it was fairly recently, and near as I could recreate the history of this place is mailings were done over the course of time, and yet at the end of it we were left with this 1,174 individuals who still fell into that category.
When was our letter sent out?
Our letters were mailed November 20th. Now, from what I have been told, it's been more than 2 weeks since we've gotten any more responses back. So it seems like if we're not at the end of the responses, we're getting close, because we did get a flood of responses kind of early once we sent it out, and now we've been getting a trickle, and we haven't received a response in 2 weeks. So we have 782 people who we neither got a response back from, nor did we get the letter returned to us as undeliverable.
So So we're 34%, so we're making progress.
We made progress.
Keep doing it, keep chipping away.
Out of those 700 something, are some of them still active voters? Are they still voting?
This is all what we're reporting on is all active voters unless I made a mistake, so I'll double check with Ms. Consomanis, who's been spearheading this. Right, that's,
They're all active voters, so they're alive.
right, okay, yeah, so according to the head shake that Ms. Consomanis is doing, they're all active voters, and that's what we're reporting.
Isn't there a situation where sending repeated letters would put them in a category where we're triggering inactive status different from other voters who are similarly situated, to the point where it would end up over time resulting in a cancellation?
No, because we don't act to put people on inactive status simply because they ignore us and our feelings get hurt. They go into inactive status when we get the letter returned. So no matter what the mailing is, no matter what the purpose of the mailing is, whether it's a 1/1/1850 mailing or whether it's our annual, voter information notice that goes out in August, if for some reason somebody moves and they are, and they have not notified us, and that mail gets returned to us from the Postal Service, then that's what triggers the inactive status. So the numbers of mailings, it would be similar, Commissioner, if
They're getting other mail.
right, yeah, I mean, if there was some
Or
other
not.
type of mail that we needed to send that's, not our annual notice, whether a poll site change notice or something like that. So that's not adding any more danger. The only thing is, and not that it's a significant factor, but any mailing we send out has a cost associated with it. So I guess my question then becomes is this where we land and we stop, or do the commissioners want us to continue to do this, say, on an annual basis until we get to the bottom of the well, and that's whatever the direction is, that's easy enough.
Keeping in mind, they'll still get the annual notices as well, which very well could be returned.
Correct. Which would, by the way, and I know Commissioner Umania, you want to say something. There could be other reasons other than this mailing why the inactive status would be triggered. And keep in mind that, I'm no prophet, but I can assure you that some of these people are going to die, and we're going to get notified that they passed away, and they would come off that 782 for that reason, or any of those reasons.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I don't think this should be our highest priority, particularly this year, given what else we have to do and what else we're gonna have to worry about. I think perhaps we should revisit it at the end of the year and see if we wanna do another mailing. But I don't think that we need to do any further follow-up other than what we've done, and then we should consider it next November after the November elections or in December.
Yeah, well, I'm with you on that. They've been voting, we know they're over the age of 18. Can't they leave it alone and grandfathered in and leave the year 1850 unless they change it? I think this all came up because we put it in the book, their birthday or something.
My recollection of why this came up was, and I know Mr. Aronson from the Daily News is here, and it was not his newspaper, but it was another newspaper in the city of New York that I think felt that they were stumbling upon some type of big issue, that the Board of Elections made a gigantic mistake. But it turned out to not be what they thought it was.
700 and something people with the birth date of 1850. I mean, we're gonna send mailings and double check it and triple check it.
Again,
Well, I think we should have accurate records, I think we should
But
do
the
it. I think
records
once
are
a year, we can wait from now to, no, 1850 wasn't their birthday, they're not actually
They won't
accurate. They're
know what
accurate
happened.
according to our system, but they're not accurate in reality to their life, so I would say just follow up with another, make sure we stay on top of it after the election season. I agree that it's.
Right, so I think we mailed this one out
November 20th.
November 20th, and
Another one, 12 months.
right, perhaps, I have it, marked down here, and perhaps Commissioner Yemaine's suggestion is the best one we get through, our election cycle. That'll bring us to right about a year from the last time that we did it, and we can address it again at that time in and around the certification or post-certification of next year's election.
Just for clarification though, Commissioner, active doesn't necessarily mean that they're voting. It just means we haven't received mail back. from that individual.
Right, okay.
So moved.
So then, that brings us, who's doing the poll worker exception report? Hello?
Is Debbie here?
All right.
We have an exception, she got an exception.
All right, well, that's, we'll move on. All right, Mr. Savino,
Yes, sir.
number 2D and E. In the absence of Mr. Richmond, Tag, you're in.
Certainly. There were a number of general objections filed in the special election in the Bronx. So far, it's my understanding that we have only received one specifications of objections with respect to the candidacy of Julio Pabon. The time to file specifications as to a number of the objections has expired, but there are a number that are still alive, so to speak. I mean, if you want me to read down the list, I can, but we can also give a copy of the ledger to any of the commissioners that are more interested in the specifics.
I don't understand. The specs, the time to file specs has expired?
As to some of the generals, it has. As to others, it has not.
Right, so it has.
So I don't know if there's really anything, I mean, it's not final just yet, it's still
Right.
pending.
Got it.
I mean, I was made aware of the fact that with respect to the one specification we did receive, it was only to the first petition volume that came in, and subsequently 2 more came in with a new cover sheet. So in effect, that objection really won't have any bearing on whether or not the candidate remains on or off the ballot. But there's really nothing more to report at this point in time, we're still waiting.
When they submit more petition to restarts the clock, right, as to where petition.
Yes, you know, for example, in the candidacy of Mr. Alvarez, he submitted one petition volume, and the time to file specifics based on the initial general objection has expired, but then he filed, I think, 1 or 2 more volumes with an amended cover sheet, which extends the time to file those objections.
So when's the actual deadline for all the specs to be received?
It all depends on when it was filed, but the last date is the 28th, Thursday. So we'll know by then what the Bronx has to work, et cetera.
So, based on past experience, it seems to make sense that we wait till the absolute last date and then do this all as a group, based on whatever comes in.
Right, it'll all come up at the hearing. You know, there's a couple of people that didn't file acceptances as well. There's also an issue that some commissioners have been made aware of a independent body that used a name very similar to an organized political body, a political party. So, you know, all that stuff will come up.
And that'll come up on the,
hearing.
On the 8th, is scheduled for the 8th?
Yes.
Right, okay, all right. And then that leads us to E for you. Appointment of cover sheet review committee?
As I just alluded to, we have an amended cover sheet with respect to one candidate. Staff ruled it, well, not ruled, based on the staff review, it appears to be valid. Obviously, we need 2 commissioners to take a look at that, a bipartisan committee, for today. I don't know if the Bronx commissioners wanted to.
I'm here anyway for another meeting, so I could do it if you guys have something else to do on the Democratic side.
If you, and I'll do it for the Republicans.
Okay, great.
I'm here for the same meeting, so
All
you have to
right.
stick around.
All right, so,
So we appoint Commissioner Araujo and Michelle
okay.
for the cover sheet review.
Thank you, commissioners.
Okay, and then that leaves us with the 2B. We have tentatively scheduled, well, put it this way, we confirmed the room for our annual Information and Education Day with the state legislature. We have a nice room, according to Ms. Consomanis, a better room than we've had in the past, scheduled for Tuesday, March 22nd, in Albany. What we are planning on doing today, again, is distributing our prior legislative agenda well in advance of that date, so that the commissioners can take a look at it and see if there's any additions, whether we want to take a look at some of the ECA recommendations and join with those, or make any amendments to the legislative agenda that we put forward last year, and certainly we can talk about that in more detail as the date nears. And then clearly, once the date's finalized, then we can circulate hotel information, et cetera, for any commissioners that want to come up Monday night and stay overnight into Tuesday, or if you wanted to come up. Coming up in the morning is a little bit dicey because we usually get started early in the day, but certainly folks can do what fits in their schedule.
I'm noticing we're doing it a lot sooner than before. I really commend you on doing that sooner.
Thank you. I mean, the idea is you want to try to catch them while they're present and the legislature's full attention is given to you. And not that I expect anything to happen before the budget process is finalized, but at least if you start to get on their agenda, you have a better shot at getting something done before the end of the legislative cycle in June, the earlier that you go up.
Do you have any appointments set up already?
We don't have the agenda finalized, but first step in the process is getting a room. If we don't have a room to have at least that one group meeting, then setting up the remainder of the agenda, but that is something that Ms. Consomanis is going to be working on, and we didn't want to move forward with that until we brought it out in front of the commissioners, in case the commissioners had a significant objection to March the 22nd for a particular reason.
I know Fred enjoys going there every year.
Right.
So
It's 5 days after St. Patty's Day, I don't know.
It's a fine thing, you say.
Yeah, 5 days after St. Patty's Day, you're just getting back into...
You're only half Irish, so you should be recovered.
That's why it normally takes you 10.
That's right.
It takes me 5. Hey.
So, unless anybody has any further questions on that, we could move on to item 2A.
No question.
The dates of home?
Date is approved, yes, I believe, right? Well, I mean, it was there for the commissioners.
Subject to getting the meetings with the
Right.
various people that we need to meet with.
Right. All right, so Ms. Consomalis, you'll continue to work on that.
And you ought to think about trying to block a set of rooms too, so that those of us who want to traipse up to Albany in the middle of the snow
Right.
would have a warm place to rest our head.
That's going to be the next step, but we weren't going to do that until we had consensus on the commissioners that the 22nd was basically okay. All right. Ms. Leibel, you thought you made good your escape, however, we got you back. I presume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the exception reports for each of the boroughs, as far as you know, were shared and at least were at least preliminarily approved by the Bronx commissioners. So,
That's correct.
If that's the case, and the Bronx commissioners are both in agreement, then we can move forward, I think, subject to you sharing the information of what the exception report contains, with the vote on the full board. So my understanding is that even though this particular situation only affects one borough, it still requires full board approval.
Right. Okay, they have asked for 36 coordinators in order to have bipartisan representation and have 2 coordinators in each poll site and 10 information clerks to go back to the requirements before the combines.
We don't usually have necessarily 2 coordinators at every site.
We don't, but I've pushed it and I've talked to you and discussed this with you, you said it was up to each borough commissioner to decide. The problem is that we have less than 20% bipartisan workers in the actual poll sites, and we're seeing more and more games and things going on. We need at least one competent worker there to coordinate and make sure things are on the up and up.
Well, that's certainly a valid reason.
Okay, so I move to approve the exception report as stated by Ms. Lavelle.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any oppositions? The report is approved. Thank you, Ms. Lavelle. I adjourn.
Yep, that's it, executive session.
Adjourn to executive session.
Move we go into executive session for litigation and personnel matters.
Second.
Out of executive session, we voted Asalia Trilla, a Bronx Dem clerk, 175 hours of advance of time to be paid back with her accruals, because she doesn't have her 10 years till July. We have approved a Brooklyn transfer from the general office. Khadija Overstreet will be transferred to Brooklyn effective January 27th. And we've also approved the stipulation of settlement regarding Mr. James Parks, dated January 21st, 2016, which he has stipulated to 5-day suspension and 1-year probation without pay.
Well, the 5-day suspension without pay, 1-year probation.
Oh, I'm sorry. 5-day suspension without pay and 1-year probation. We've also approved the stipulation of settlement for employee Stanley Scott, S-C-U-T-T, 5-day suspension without pay and 1-year probation. It's also dated January 21st, 2016. And another stipulation of settlement involving employee Joseph Duffy, dated October 23rd, 2015, where he has agreed to get 1-year probation effective that date.
Okay, I believe that concludes.
That concludes everything in executive session. Mr. Flax, how can I help you?
No, I just,
Okay, we're adjourning to, we've adjourned to next week, February 2nd at 1:30 p.m.
isn't that a holiday?